Thank you all so much for joining us today, and I'm so thrilled to get to share some of this work at the iSchool and with our wider community in Colma, and to be honored to be the first talk of spring quarter. And I hope we will do Jason's work justice, and I'll have my colleagues introduce themselves when they share. We each have a section in the presentation, and I'll get us started. I'm Marika Seafor, and I'm an associate professor here in the Information School at the University of Washington. And it's my great pleasure to get to share this work. So today we're going to give an overview of the Community Archives Toolkit, which there'll be a link to in just a moment. And we'll be talking about some of the sections of that toolkit, as well as where it came from, the amazing collecting that our colleagues at the Tacoma Public Library did, and thinking about how this project is moving in the future in this moment of kind of both the pointing to the kind of increased value of doing community archives work, but also some of the challenges in this moment. And we'll do our best to leave the last few minutes for conversation, and we look forward to sharing this work with you. So, Chris, I think you're up first.
Well, that's interesting. I had completely missed that I was responsible for this. I apologize, but I'll provide as best of an overview as I can. So we prepared the toolkit to basically be a resource for folks who were interested in starting a community archive within a public library setting. So community archives obviously exist outside of those settings. So we were really focused on taking the lessons that we had learned from working with Tacoma Public Library and translating those as much as possible into a useful resource for libraries in different settings. So basically, we start out with an overview to help orient folks to what is a community archive. Again, starting from the assumption that people will be at different points as far as their experience with the community archives. So really just trying to provide some background as far as that's concerned. And then each chapter, basically, we tried to make as practical and useful by including examples at the end of, say, forms that we had used, and also just trying to help people think through certain issues that would apply in their community based off of the lessons that we had learned at Tacoma. So chapter 2 covers the planning and launching of a community archive. So thinking through things like staffing and what that might mean and what different roles you might need. And also how you would both find but also work with your partners. And then also covering topics like funding and support and sustaining those engagements with your community partners, which are obviously all very important. Chapter 3 focuses on actually determining and figuring out what type of collection that you want to have in your community archive. Lots of different models and examples of those different models are included in the toolkit. So those pieces will help people think through, again, as they approach those collection development activities, what exactly they want to do or what makes sense, both for the type of materials they're collecting, but also for the physical environment that they may have if they decide whether they want to actually collect physical items or whether it's going to be all digital. And then chapter 4 covers the sharing and sustaining the archive, so working with different partners. Specifically, we had some work because our project involved working with Tacoma Public Schools and using some of the materials that were created in their lessons, but also working with different local community partners, including artists. We had some great experiences working in the neighborhoods in Tacoma and working directly with some of the artists at some of the events. So we talk a little bit about that. And then I think one of the major challenges of any community-based effort is also around sustainability. So those are the main sort of pieces that we have within the toolkit. And then the appendices really focus on two things. One, resources that we had found throughout our work that we thought might be useful to people, either for additional background or readings. But also we included basically every, I think Dindria and Anna can confirm this, but it feels like we probably put almost every single form that we used, because that was also something that we heard when we talked with people who we asked about the toolkit, what would be useful. And they almost all said examples from other projects and examples of what you all use, the actual templates and things like that, whether it was outreach materials, whether it's, oral history interview form, all of those different pieces. So again, very sort of practical things to help people get started so that they don't aren't necessarily starting from scratch. So I think that's the quick overview. If I left anything out, please feel free for anyone else to jump in.
Thanks so much, Chris. Let's see here. It's my pleasure to talk about the kind of orientation pieces. As Chris shared, this toolkit was built with a wide range of library professionals in mind, whether folks who had a lot of archives experience but no community archives experience, or folks who were perhaps doing archival work for the first time. And so this first chapter really provides a kind of orientation and what I hope is an invitation to dig further into the archives literature. It also provides some of the kind of justification of where this toolkit kind of came from. As I should say, the first iteration of this project was generously funded by the Institute for Museum and Library Services through a grant to the Tacoma Public Library. At that point, their largest grant to date, and it was our honor at UW to be a partner in that work and to collaborate with our amazing colleagues at Tacoma Public, who you'll hear from in a few minutes. But really, part of why we argued to IMLS that this work needed to happen, and you'll hear about that work in greater detail, was that community archives serve a really important and unique purpose, as do public libraries. And that really, in thinking about how we might think those two things together, there's a kind of unique power and situatedness. And really, right, as the folks in this room are probably very likely aware, archives have long underrepresented, misrepresented, or excluded people of marginalized heritage and other kinds of underrepresented communities. And this is something that in work with Michelle Caswell and Mario Ramirez, we called symbolic annihilation, drawing from media studies work, thinking about what it means to not see yourself in the archive. And really, community archives have been one of the spaces where people, especially people from underrepresented communities, can actually see themselves. Something that we call symbolic belonging in another article, or representational belonging. And really, it's not just in practice that community archives have such a powerful example. Really, community archives have pushed those of us who work in archival studies to rethink archival scholarship, to think about doing person-centered work, doing critical archival work, to think about how we do social justice, equity, ideas, as we would call it in the school, through archival work. And as I was talking about, right, really this project embodies the kind of values of a critical archival studies, both through activities like collecting, but also in thinking about how we collaborate and encourage participation and co-design in ways I'll talk about in a moment. This is all an effort to make archives more inclusive, more welcoming, more equitable, and to for me, I'm very interested too in what this toolkit can bring for us to rethink how we train archival professionals how we rethink archival concepts and how we can transform archival practice and with it society more broadly. Issues that I think, again, the folks in this room probably agree are deeply important, especially in this moment. And I think too, our community archives have often thought very critically about the role identity and power play and have navigated that in rich and thoughtful ways that I know my colleagues will talk about around collecting and around programming. And really, uh, I want to emphasize that community archives are incredibly diverse and that we're talking about one case study in particular, largely here, right, that's formed around geography as well as other kinds of identity. But community archives can form from a wide range of things, whether a shared interest, belief, experience, a purpose, an event, a political orientation, and really the breadth is astounding. And the toolkit, because again, we want to make this really accessible to folks with a wide range of backgrounds and experiences. Uh, we wanted to share what we see as some of the kind of core characteristics of community archives work. And for me, I see that as community control, how actively it's less for me about whether that archives lives within a public library, an independent grassroots organization, in an academic institution. It's really about how does the community participate on their own terms in documenting their own history. What uh, British archival scholars have called documenting the history of their commonality, right? And communities are, of course, incredibly diverse and disparate, and what those archives look like should mirror those communities. And in line with the values of community archives, this project in particular was highly participatory in the way in which we talk about, and that's really part of the goal of community archives work is to broaden participation in archival production, whether that's if those collections in the end come to you as an institution or not. It's about how do we build skills, how do we work with communities to do the kinds of projects they want to do. And really, this is an act of sharing stewardship between community members and organizations. In our case, we're thinking particularly about what public libraries can do uniquely in this space. But I think these resources can be useful in other settings as well. And right, I see community archives as fundamentally about the present and the future as much as about the past. This is about how we represent and advocate for more socially just societies by building these kinds of thoughtful, critical relationships with our past and present. And there's a wide breadth, and I don't even think this slide begins to capture it, but these are all amazing organizations, and you'll see too in the toolkit some kind of deeper, richer description of different kinds of community archives forms, from those that exist purely in digital form with no collecting, to what we did in Tacoma, which is a hybrid of post-custodial and traditional collecting models, to, again, independent grassroots community archives, to ones that operate in partnership with academic or other kinds of institutions. And really, there's such an amazing breadth, and all of these are amazing examples to review. I'll also be talking a bit about, as one of the folks who's had the privilege to be involved in this project from the very beginning, I want to talk a bit about how we actually did some of this work, how we put it into practice in the context of Tacoma. In here, we were very fortunate to be approached at the University of Washington by our colleagues at the Tacoma Public Library, including Anna Trammell, who will be talking in just a few minutes. And they were interested in doing community archives and building a community archives for Tacoma, which again, as many folks in this region are probably well aware, is a mid-sized city here in the Pacific Northwest. And they had had a few iterations of seeking funding for a project, and ended up bringing us in as the University of Washington to think about a kind of research and service to practice component of this work. And for me, this is one of the things I always hope to do in my position in an academic institution is to be able to kind of marshal our resources to partner and work with uh, organizations and institutions who are doing important information work. And so we uh, really designed this using kind of the rich body of experience from my colleagues in the technology and social change group who had done lots of kind of participatory work, participatory mapping work. Our colleague Jason Young, for instance, built this beautiful mapping platform for us to allow the kind of generation of stories and to map them onto here. We're talking about a community archive with a geographic kind of unity, thinking about what kinds of stories needed to be told, what kinds of places needed to be accounted for, what kinds of communities should be the priority. And we originally envisioned this as something that would be a series of workshops in person, but then COVID happened and that was not possible. So we ended up doing a kind of condensed version of an archives co-design, listening session, and community mapping project. And we, as you'll read about in the toolkit in much greater detail, explored a few different models to do this, but we're most successful, I think, when we worked with individuals who were leaders in their communities or with groups who represented parts of the diverse communities in Tacoma. And they would then bring their constituents into these conversations. And we got to hear amazing stories. We got to think about the work that had already been done, about stories that should be documented, and about the way in which the archives form itself should take. And so we really wanted this to be a process of co-design with the community. And we have many reflections on how to do that in terms of relationship building, both in terms of existing relationships your library or organization may have, and the process of building new ones, because I think that process of relationship building is fundamental to any kind of success that we had. And again, this is the link if you want to explore it a bit. We had folks add to the story map, and it's everything right from specific grounded events in a particular place in Tacoma to things that are larger topics that folks wanted to make sure we documented and prioritized. And we used this as a tool to make those priorities because we knew we would not be able to capture everything, even with the kind of amazing resources we had. And we wanted to think about what community members wanted to surface. And I'll turn it over now for more specifics to Dindria.
Hello, beautiful people. It is so wonderful to see you all. I can't see you all, but I'm going to say that anyway. I hope you're all doing fabulously. It's a pretty nice day, I have to say. And I am Dindria. My pronouns are she, he, and I am a community and information specialist at the Tacoma Public Library. I spent a year and a half in the Community Archives Center, and it was such a joy. It was such a pleasure to help build this community archive. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. And so I want to share with you just a few people. I could talk endlessly about the community archives, but I'm not going to do that because we want to have questions from you. But I wanted to share with you Mrs. Freddie Mae Barnett. She was of the Tacoma Association of Colored Women's Clubs, and I went to her facility where she lived in a retirement home to interview her about her life story. And what is interesting about a life story is that it can be long, especially if you've had a long life. But I narrowed down to 3 questions that I put in the back of the toolkit. And these questions were developed. I had so much freedom in developing this because it really had to do with what the community wanted to know and what I wanted to know. And everything is from the StoryCorps inspiration. And so it gave us purpose in knowing that we wanted to keep these stories alive. And that collecting oral histories is so important because we don't all stay here forever. So we need to preserve these stories for the future generations. Next slide, please. And I love to tell you about Pastor Tony Martin of the City Bridge Church. Let me tell you what, Pastor Tony Martin sat me down and said, "Why are you doing this?" And I thought, woo, okay, I better have a good answer. But really, it really came down to him vetting who I was and who I was representing as the organization of Tacoma Public Library. Why did I want to do a story fest in the East Side, in Salishan? And it gave us ideas for how we needed to interact and build relationships with the communities that we wanted to help represent. The Community Archives Center, we had one method. We had a lot of methods, but one of them was events and telling and recording stories that preserved events around Tacoma. We tried to hit every neighborhood and we tried to reach as many different people as we could. And I have to say, what I wanted was more time because I think that the relationships build over time and you get more people interested in sharing their stories, including the youth. And that was an interesting endeavor when I went into the schools because the youth thought, I don't have a story to tell. And I was like, woo, yes, you do. Okay, so we've got some youth stories in our archives. We've got some elder stories that give you some wisdom. And then we have some stories of political nature, you know, because all of us are living in these times of values and we all have different perspectives to share. Next slide. Now I'm just going to go through really quickly some of the things that we did and like kind of like a timeline of how we went about a story fest, for instance. We started with that digital story map that Marika shared with you. We did some co-design workshops. We did things called gallery walks. Now, I took this from teaching, okay, because, you know, I was a teacher for 20 years. So I had to lean on some of those skills. But getting answers to questions about your neighborhood was really valuable for us. Doing the OHIs, I called them, one-on-one personal interviews, but we also did group interviews as well, like with the Hilltop Library Restoration Group. Next slide. We did a lot of digitization. And I tell you what, one of the things that we did also with the Community Archives Center is we created a memory lab. So now in the main branch of Tacoma Public Library, we have a memory lab that goes along with our makers labs. And people love to take their pictures and immortalize them on their digital USB. We had youth stations. We had a person in our organization that really was excellent at doing comic book drawings, and they really helped the young people see that they did have a story to tell. And then we had some storytelling, which is a total art form unto itself, different than being interviewed, but that also transmits culture. And then presentations about the neighborhood that came from local historians and from the Community Archives Center, the Northwest Room as well. Next slide. We did some community sharing, and that kind of sharing were art performances. We had dance teams come together and present a performance that was just about the Hilltop at the Hilltop Story Fest. We had some documentaries and we had student films. Then we had articles. We love to kind of summarize what we did in like Archival Outlook, for instance, and any of the local papers that you can get a hold of or social media. City Line, the television show for Tacoma. And we had pop-up exhibits. We had some money to create from our digital archives banners. They were kind of standing banners that you could just kind of take a gander at and learn about all these different kind of stories in Tacoma. And we call it the unsilent stories. Then I have to really point out lunch. Now, some of you might think, oh, well, why would you pay for lunch? Let me tell you what, lunch brings people together and it allows them to sit and share their photographs have some time to talk to one another. We had people like Jamaica Scott talking to people that may not have even known who she was. And I love the picture of that. I don't know if I have a picture of that right now, but those are the kinds of activities we would do. Next slide. And here are some pictures of those activities. There's Jamaica Scott, yeah, in the bottom left. All right. Next slide. Oh, and that's a Black Lives Matter mural, just in case you haven't seen it yet, in the bottom right. All right. Thank you so much for listening. I will turn it over to my colleague, Anna Trammell.
Thank you, Dendria. So hi, everyone. My name's Anna Trammell. I am the Community Archiving Program Manager with the Internet Archive. So why am I here? Well, before joining the Internet Archive last year, I was the manager of archives and special collections at Tacoma Public Library. So I was involved in that initial Community Archive Center grant from IMLS that Marika described, and that project to establish the Community Archive Center and create the toolkit. And now I have the opportunity to continue to work with Marika and the amazing University of Washington team here, even after I've made this transition to my new role with the Internet Archive. So I'm going to be talking about Chapter 4 of the toolkit, which focused on sharing and sustaining a community archive. You can go ahead and change to the next slide, please. So making the content that we gathered, that Dendria was just describing, all these different ways we went about gathering people's stories and memories across Tacoma. And it was really important to make that content as accessible and discoverable as possible. And that was really always a priority for Tacoma Public Library, always a priority for this team. And in those initial listening sessions that Marika mentioned with the community, one thing that we heard was that they wanted to make sure that the stories and the content that they shared was going to be publicly accessible. I think there was maybe some skepticism, people thinking, I'm going to invest my time in this, I'm going to come in and do an oral history, share my story, and then nothing's ever going to happen with it. So people who recorded an oral history with us or brought in their family photographs to an event for digitization, they were going to see that content publicly available in our database within 1 week. So Dendria and I stayed very busy after those events happened. And that was just really our way of showing our respect for the people who were working with us, and a way for us to really demonstrate, we valued their stories and we valued their investment in this project. So over the course of the year and a half, you can actually stay on the last slide, Marika. So over the course of the year and a half that we were really focused on collecting, we collected and provided access to 21 new collections, and that included 1,991 digital objects, and 287 of those digital objects were oral history recordings. And these were either created by our staff, mostly Dendria, or by community members. And these included organizational records from different community groups, like the records of the Black Women's Caucus of Washington State, who we were able to work with and preserve their content, digitize a lot of their content. Personal papers from individuals, including the founder of a local community organization called the Korean Women's Association. And other community-generated content. So, for example, radio programs that appeared on the volunteer-run radio station called Radio Tacoma. That was the kind of content that we were also preserving and providing access to. But, of course, making this content available, and you can go ahead and change slides now, Marika. Making it available online was a big part of our work, but that wasn't really enough. We couldn't just expect people to, come to us and start using the content or know that it was available. We really had to develop some innovative strategies that would allow us to expand access and use, particularly within the communities that we were most committed to reaching through this project. So one of the key things that we did was we partnered with educators, which is something that Chris mentioned in the beginning. So we were able to host a day-long workshop for Tacoma Public Schools teachers that really allowed us to walk them through ways that they can have their students both use and contribute to the Community Archives Center. So we gave them examples of assignments and exercises that teachers could incorporate into the classroom that would allow their students to analyze the Community Archives Center's collections. So that was the use piece. But then we also created a method for students to conduct their own oral history projects. And then those projects could then become a part of the Community Archives Center's collections. And, this really allowed students, and these were middle school and high school students, to think about the problem of missing voices in Tacoma's local history. And then they were able to play an active role in correcting those silences. And we also, as Dendria mentioned, brought the project out into the community. We couldn't expect people to come to us to discover this content. We really needed to get beyond the four walls of the library. And we were able to accomplish this through exhibits. So we created a traveling exhibit and we displayed this at a number of community spaces across Tacoma. And then we also did some pop-up exhibits to showcase collections at various, tabling opportunities and community events. And this was really an effective way to show how the collection that we were building was relevant, because we were able to connect the exhibit to the specific neighborhood or community or topic that community event was related to. And we also just really worked to raise public awareness about the project and the collection and find ways to demonstrate its value. So as Dendria mentioned, we discussed the project in local newspapers and neighborhood newsletters. We went on local TV, we went on podcast. So we just really, any opportunity we had to talk about the work, we took that opportunity to just make people aware of this project and how they could engage with it. But in planning the project, we always knew that the grant that we received from IMLS was temporary. And at the time, we had no idea about the future of IMLS or, potential future opportunities to collaborate with the University of Washington. So we were really thinking, we've got 2 years to develop and launch a strong and successful project, but we have to plan from the beginning for that funding to run out. And these activities have to be folded into our existing work and staffing levels. So a big part of the toolkit was really talking about how important it is to keep sustainability in mind from the earliest planning stages of a community archives project. So we really thought about, how to design our project in a way that was scalable. So we created a core set of collection building program activities, and then we were able to apply those in multiple contexts. And, our work with educators, for example, focused on creating lesson plans and primary source sets that could be adapted for all grade levels and disciplines. So basically everything we did was designed so that we could build the infrastructure once and then maximize the impact by adapting these activities broadly. So in the toolkit, we really ask readers to think about, how can you design your projects in such a way that you can spread the work beyond a single individual or unit. And similarly, strong partnerships can help the project sustain itself. So we talk in the toolkit about, instead of building all your own events and initiatives from the ground up, can you find ways to connect to existing community projects? And this was something that we did, which was really a win-win situation, because we could show our support and contribute to important initiatives without having to kind of take on the full labor burden of full event planning and marketing and execution. So this is really where that original toolkit and our initial project at Tacoma Public Library left off. And now I'm going to turn things over to Cindy Aiden, Sandy Littletree, and Chris Joasis, who are going to tell you more about where do we go from here? What's next for the Community Archives Center?
Great. Thank you, Anna. I'll get us started. So I'm Sandy Littletree. I am an assistant professor here at the iSchool, and I joined this project at this point. All of the wonderful things that you've heard has just been, it's been amazing to learn about the project, to you see how useful the toolkit is and how informed it is by all of these activities, which were just incredible, creating a really useful tool. And so at this point, we decided to pursue an IMLS grant to continue this work. Part of the work was informed by presenting, the team presented this toolkit to practitioners at different conferences and got feedback from other people from, other types of libraries that were different than Tacoma, right? Small rural libraries, different types of communities. And so there was some feedback given that, how do we implement this in our community? And we wondered, and the team wondered, are there ways that this toolkit can be improved to serve a larger group of libraries? And so that's where these next steps came in. And so we decided to provide some training as well for librarians of how to use this toolkit. So we received a IMLS grant, which got kicked off last year, last fall, to expand that toolkit, right? And to think about expanding the support and the network for public librarians to really learn about this type of work and to also add to the scholarly record, right? We wanted to learn, how can we understand community archives and the roles in the communities, and also think about those different types of libraries, those small rural libraries or different types of urban settings. So we designed this next stage to answer those questions through activities such as we've conducted, we have some interviews and focus groups, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the next slide. And, all of these things were really to help inform a more enriched toolkit. So a big part of this next stage is having an in-person cohort and training coming here to Seattle to also learn how this toolkit can be improved. So these are the research questions that we proposed. Again, how do understandings of community archives and their desired role in communities vary between public library staff from different types of systems? How do urban and rural systems different and the challenges? We understand, not every library is the same, so we really want to dive into that. And how do these systems differ in terms of best practices for implementing impactful community archives? So there, I will turn it over to Cindy and Chris to finish us out.
Thank you so much, Sandy. So we started this grant last fall, and what we immediately did was identify 2 libraries that we could talk to individually, ask them to look at the toolkit and give us some questions. We were starting our inquiry about how does this toolkit apply in different kinds of settings. And one of the libraries we talked to individually was a small rural library from Texas who hadn't done any community archives work. And the other was a large rural urban library that had a long history of a memory project. So 2 different perspectives on our toolkit. And then we collected folks, invited folks to come to focus groups. It should be noted that one of the things that's so important about this project is there's so much ongoing interest in it. We had informational sessions to talk about this project and how we would start collecting applications. And we had over 100 people. And you'll see that we solicited those applications for an in-person event that we figured was a couple of days long, would give them some training, would give them some money to help them practice start doing their own archival work. 62 applicants from 24 states. So a lot of interest in this work. The focus group interviews were interesting. We spoke to a rural group of 3 different libraries in North Carolina, Asheville, in Texas, rural New Mexico, and in Mississippi. And the urban libraries were from, let's see, Washington, D.C., Chicago Public, Austin Public, and then Pikes Peak in Colorado. Interestingly, just a few notes about the kinds of things we heard. The rural group their county systems were similar in some of their organizational considerations. One of them, the one in New Mexico, actually ran a museum, and she had interesting stories because a lot of people had chosen to, to bring their stuff to that museum and wanted to use it as a community museum and archive. It seems that in some cases, archival work isn't intentional, just as in that museum example. People will look to the library and they'll bring things, they'll want to see the library collect certain things, or the library will inherit something that was done by a volunteer group or a friends group earlier and learn that they've got the beginnings of something and have to figure out how to make it more formal or what more to do. The urban libraries tended to have more resources than the rural ones, and some of them had longer histories of having archival collections, but some of those collections had a lot of demands and particular guidelines, if you will. Managing all the projects is harder in a larger system, and making sure that the archival work gets the prioritization that it needs and the recognition across the system that this is something that those libraries are doing and want to keep doing. And then finally, for both library systems, volunteers can be an issue, making sure, first of all, in larger systems, sometimes you can't use volunteers. And in smaller systems, the volunteers and the friends groups can be pretty enthusiastic and have their own sense of ownership to the institution and their own views of how they want to represent the community or do the work or enthusiastically collect a lot of stuff that then the library has to figure out how to address. So it was very informative, and we were using those focus groups to help us expand the toolkit and get ready for that cohort. Right now, that cohort planning is on hold. And with that, I'll hand it over to Chris to fill you in on next steps.
So as Sandy and Cindy have pointed out, we felt like we had some great momentum there. As someone said, it was a great response for the applications. We got a wide range from small rural libraries to large urban systems. So we're very excited about the research heading forward and what we're going to be able to do with that particular cohort. But as many people know, unfortunately, IMLS began terminating grants earlier in April, and our grant was one of the ones that was terminated. So we have had about 2 weeks, and we've been brainstorming as a team to try and think about what we'd like to do in the future. How could we continue to sustain some of the efforts, again, based off of the excitement and some of the interesting observations that we've had, even from these limited interactions with libraries about their experience with community archives. So we're still focused on trying to do something. We don't know exactly what that is going to be, but similar to the project plan that we had, what we'd like to do is think about how we can provide not just the training, but what we've heard from lots of libraries is just hearing about other situations, other people who've undertaken this, what their projects look like. So really sort of trying to form a community of community archive practitioners within the public library field. We'd really love to provide that opportunity so that people can hear those stories. We do think that it's important to continue to gather additional data so that we can inform some of those research questions. Again, we think they're important, and we think that there's a lot of interest based off of what we've heard, both from our project, but also similar projects that IMLS has funded over the past probably 3 to 4 years. And we'd love to be able to actually plug all that into updating the toolkit, maybe not to the extent that we were originally planning to do, but adding in these additional resources and examples and some additional pieces that we've heard about from those interviews to help people as they may think about undertaking this. So we hope that to have a more formal plan and get in touch with the applicants to let them know about that, so that we can hopefully sustain these efforts moving forward. I'm not sure what the last
There's
slide.
one more slide, Marika, just showing.
yes.
Oh, right.
Thank you, and again, links to the toolkit and to the Community Archives Center and its work. And just to add to what my colleagues were saying, I think part of the most heartbreaking part of this grant cancellation is not being able to support a learning cohort next year in the way we envisioned, because we were hoping to support 8 libraries in doing community archives work and to learn from and with them, and to support them in that work. And so we'll be thinking about ways to support them in making these beautiful, wonderful projects happen, whether through our support or other kinds of resources. But I want to thank everyone for your time and attention, and we'll open it up to your questions and comments. And I can try to keep an eye on the chat, and you're welcome to have questions for the whole group or for particular folks.
Thanks so much, Marika and panel. What a great project. I think those of you who are following chat see the enthusiasm of the audience here about it. And I think that, you know, if I'd love to have had some funders in the room, because it's just such a compelling story and journey that I think it'd be scrambling to say that we can't let this project stop. It's got so much momentum and you're just right in the middle of it. Yeah, if there's questions, you can put them into chat there, and we'll do that, because I think we have muted the participants. But maybe just as we're waiting for some to go in, I was just going to put out there, thinking over the course of this project, you know, both the creation of the toolkit and the doing community archive work in Tacoma, just if any of you had an example of sort of something that you discovered, something you didn't know going into it that came out to say that was a really a great aha from this work.
Yeah, I guess those initial community listening sessions were so valuable because, of course, we had written the IMLS grant application. We had all talked about how we thought this project would go. We had put together a work plan, and then we held those listening sessions, and the community basically told us, yeah, we don't like your work plan. We want you to do it completely differently. And we had to really respond to that. That was the point of having those listening sessions. So we heard from the community, you know, we want oral history to be a big part of this project. That was not really the way we had thought about the project going. You know, we hadn't really talked about oral history being a big part of the work that we were doing, but that's how the community wanted to participate. We also heard from them that they really wanted us to focus on the neighborhoods of Tacoma and how their culture was unique from neighborhood to neighborhood. That was not the way we had thought that the project would go, wasn't something we had talked about in that application, but that's something that we heard loud and clear from the community. So we really just kind of reconfigured the whole project to really respond to the community and give them what they asked for. So we had a big oral history component. We had events in every neighborhood in Tacoma. And some of those were events that we held at library branches in Tacoma. And then we really thought about the neighborhoods that were underserved and undersupported by the library and how we could pay particular attention to those neighborhoods. And that was really what shaped our project, the events that we had, how our collection emerged, how it continues to evolve to this day. So that was something that really surprised us and really worked out well for us to listen to the community and make those adjustments.
Sharon, Cindy here. I want to comment on Steve's note in the chat where he mentions a book, Urgent Archives. And it makes me think that one thing we all agreed about when we were preparing these slides is that this is really a moment. My goodness, there's so much erasure going on, and there's so much suppression of voices. And there's such an urgent need right now for all of us to think about how to do this work and to capture this work. So thanks for that, Michelle Caswell citation.
And I think Timmy's got a great question in the chat that I don't know if I have a good answer to yet, but she asks, what kind of support do you need in order for people working in policy and funding spaces to continue to advocate for this work? And we do have some like concrete, specific kind of initial asks. Namely, we would love to continue to pay Dindria to be a part of this work and to support her time. And as you can tell, she brings so much heart and expertise. And it was, for me, one of the kind of greatest joys of this project has been getting to work with somebody who does have such an amazing community organizing and educator background and all the beautiful things she brought to this work. And for me, as I said, I think the other kind of concrete ask for us is how do we support the public libraries we were initially envisioning we would spend a year working with. The IMLS funding would have paid each of those libraries a stipend to do a community archives project after coming together for a training, and then would have supported libraries in participating in virtual kind of trainings and collaborations that would continue throughout the year. And so we would love it if somebody wants to fund that part of the work to continue, especially as it feels heartbreaking to have solicited those applications and then got to be able to fund that important work. And again, I think for me, part of what I kind of am so excited by in this project is the ability to work. Public libraries are the only kind of library I think I've not worked in, and I've learned so much in thinking and working with our public library colleagues, and I would love for us to advocate for archives to be part of the kind of funding and support of public library work, which all needs a great deal of support from us at the moment. I don't know if my colleagues want to add anything there.
I
Nina's
see
got her hands
Nina
up. Yeah.
has her hand up. We can see if, I think, if you can unmute, let's see if it works. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Okay, great. It's a little bit low, but
Let me see if I can.
okay.
Great. This toolkit is amazing. I think some of you know that I work in the museology program as an associate teaching professor, and I teach community engagement. I was like, oh my God, like there's so much I could share with my students from this toolkit. And I mean, I see a natural connection to museums, especially small historical museums that are located and of their community. And I guess I have two parts to this question. The first is, was that something that was also emerging from your conversations when you were doing this work, is how this could extend more specifically to those community-based museums? And the second is, you know, I think a lot about tensions in community engagement and how, you know, working across the community often means grappling with shared history that can have different perspectives, points of view. And do you see this toolkit also being extended into a place of healing by bringing those perspectives together in a way that sort of surfaces some of those ideas that people hold and connects them? Or is this something that is not yet ready for that part where you're grappling with those kinds of polyvocal tensions?
I would love to answer the second part, but I'm not sure about the first part. So who would like to answer the first?
Dindri, I think go ahead and answer the second part, and then we'll let one of us jump in.
All right. Well, you are inspiring me. Is it Mina? All right. Because using the stories that are on our online record collection system, ORCA, would be a great way for me to interact with the truth, racial healing, and transformation circles that we plan on having in July. So I think that it's definitely my ideas are spinning in my head, but I think that it's about collecting the stories first and then deciding how to use them in a program. So if you want to do a community healing program and use something like the truth, racial healing, and transformation rubric, kind of like I would say that it was a framework, then that can be done. That is so, I just love that idea. I don't think that you necessarily want to do all of the analysis and interpretation in your collections, because you have to be very clear about your own bias as you are collecting, because you're not going to hear things that you always want to hear. But I think it's really important to represent as many points of view as possible. So that's what I have.
I love it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. And I'm just going to be diving into this. Thank you so much for creating this.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to hear that it resonates in a kind of museum space as well. I think one of the things, one of the many reasons we brought Sandy and Cindy into this work too is a kind of our long-term vision was to think about how we might support Indigenous communities in doing archives work, as often those distinctions between libraries, archives, and museums don't necessarily make sense in those contexts. And we did decide it was, we wanted to do that work justice. And so our hope here was to work with library systems that serve Indigenous communities and to support projects in that space, and then to move towards that. But I would love to hear as you start thinking about what translates and doesn't translate for museum spaces. I would love to hear that. And I'm always excited to think about ways we can build across those spaces.
Happy to. I'll follow up later.
And I think we're just about at time, though Christine had a great question in the chat. Again, I think really, as he pointed to, hearing from our colleagues at WOA and ALA was especially valuable in thinking about how do we actually translate this into practice. And I think, again, the resources, which all due credit to Dindri and Anna, are a fundamental part of actually making this kind of work applicable and actionable for busy public librarians who are doing many, many other things, and having those forms and being able to adapt them, whether kind of press releases from the project to deeds of gift to other kinds of detailed resources, I think really helps make something usable by our colleagues. And we've been very excited to hear that people are teaching it and using it and sharing it with volunteers and colleagues.
Well, thank you so much. We've just reached, unfortunately, the end of our hour together. Appreciate that. We'll give you a virtual claps and hearts and everything. Well, let's hope that the story continues from here. And as we were all saying, this is really just both interesting and important work. And from a CALMA perspective, just delighted to see the bridging of library, archive, museum, and just in the space of this time together. So that's a wonderful way to end it.
And thank you so much to Sharon and Brandon for organizing and for all of our work with CALMA.
Yes, for hosting us. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And thank you for allowing us to record so that we can share this with more of the students and faculty who couldn't make it today. Thank you so much. Take care.
Everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.